Good day, folks. Bob from BBD heads up. While domestic politics reaches depth of depravity, whether it's in Uttar Pradesh, whether it's in Rajasthan, whether it's in Maharashtra, caught up with insignificant garbage of loudspeakers while our economy is seems to be in a spiral going down, right? Despite that GST numbers, folks, let me tell you, it's not happening. Okay. But in the world order, we seem to be doing pretty well because we, like I said, we are the cynosure of most of the West. And as what he says, Shashi Shekhar Rai, the Ukraine crisis and the need for a new world order. The war in Ukraine has been going on for over 50 days now. It could well drag on in this short time. The conflict has not only divided the world in two, but also given rise to fears of World War III. It has also been proved that the order established after the dissolution of the Soviet Union has now become obsolete. There is now only one of two scenarios: either build a new world order keeping every country's interest in mind, or prepare for a dark future marked by strife and conflict. Probably, right? India can tackle the new world order, as written by Rohan Mukherjee. He says, Beijing will also be careful not to instigate a financial war with the West by extending substantial assistance to Russia, a country that only accounts for 2% of China's total trade. Third, and finally, as long as China's actions remain a major concern in the Indo-Pacific, India will be a vital part of West strategy. Keep remember that, right? The Rice-Sena dialogue, as written by Prashant Jha. As leaders come to Delhi, Indian diplomacy has reasons to be pleased. The first narrative is what dominates most foreign ministries, armed forces, intelligence agencies, business chambers, investment banks, financial firms, and policy institutes. In this narrative, India is among the most important swing players in the international system. It is politically stable with strong leadership within a democratic framework. It is among the key global economic engines coupled with pro-business regime and expanding market. Should be remembered, but the other narrative should not be forgotten. That's the clutter and the echo chambers around, right? Global security czars meet likely in India. This is another important point. And at India's moment, as Shyam Saran writes, he says, the annual Raisina dialogue provided the ostensible reason for three of these visits, but public interactions were no doubt accompanied by more private and candid conversation. The European presence was prominent. China and Russia were absent from amongst the official designates, which is a pity. Then he says, reminding the West of its culpability in leaving a mess in Asia, which countries like India have had to deal with, may win some kudos, or just with the bucks. That does not help India deal with the far more serious challenge it will have to confront in the aftermath of a disorienting shake-up in geopolitical equations. India will need the West more than it has in the recent past, whether in building up its deterrent capabilities or accelerating its economic and technological transformation. India's Quad partners, the US, Japan, Australia, its partners in Europe and several ASEAN countries see India as an anchor that could help stabilize the international situation. They have stake in India as emerging as an influential power and are willing to contribute to that end. This is an opportunity that ought to be leveraged as part of a broader strategy. The temptation to indulge in mutual knuckle rapping should be avoided. Then he says, the attention being paid to India is substantive, that reflects not what India is, but rather what India could become as one of the key architects of new international order. It would be easy to bask in the international prominence and forget that this may soon evaporate if India fails to make the right choices this time. It is time to think strategically about India's place in the world, which is in the midst of a historic transformation. A rare but perishable opportunity has presented itself to significantly advance India's long-term prospects. It must be grasped with single-minded tenacity. And you know what your big problem? 3 years of conflict, LAC resolution on slow burn, collaboration with Confucius centers require FCRA. Okay, she calls for an all-out infra push to boost economy. He's not going anywhere, but the US is with us. US to back India's rise in Indo-Pacific strategy. India built ties with Russia out of necessity. He's rightly called it. US to boost India's ability against Chinese naval activities. We need that desperately. Eye on China, India and US plan to sea patrol and intel sharing, very critical. But here's what you have to worry about, right? This is the echo chamber. Muslims being targeted with violence around the world, says Biden. And the reason why that is because of this US congressman's POK tour attracts India's fire. Imran meets Omar. This lady is US Congresswoman Ila Omar. Okay. US says Ila Omar's Pakistan visit not sponsored by government. US pledges to help India end its dependence on Russian weapons. This is the real McCoy. And the Americans must understand this. This is the real McCoy and should step in with leasing, folks. Leasing. Biden to woo PM in Tokyo to make India ditch Russia. It'll only happen with arms. Maybe the United States should offer us an aircraft carrier and nuclear submarine, or to become AUKUS +1. India no more weak, won't spare at harm, says Rajnath. And aligned with free world allies against the autocratic nexus of Moscow and Beijing, says Kaushara. First, convey unreserved solidarity with Ukrainian people, which we have. Second, embark on an operation with warp speed to diversify the defense industry with priority in domestic production. That's why we need AUKUS. And the United States. Third, India's role as a leader of the free world should be institutionalized. G7 should be reconstituted as G10. Fourth, India should expeditiously explain its position on Ukraine to the world audience. Ambiguity does not further its cause. India would convey unequivocal solidarity with Ukraine. With China as its principal threat, India should align with the free world against the autocratic nexus of Moscow and Beijing. There, folks, that's what it is. Cheers. Harsh Prant interestingly writes, why is the West booing New Delhi. He says the West has been asking India to do more and Western media has lectured India on its democratic responsibilities. But Western governments seem to comprehend India's challenges much better, and so in an ironic way, this crisis has provided the means to both New Delhi and the West to come closer and to engage either more substantively. This remarkable shift in outreach by the West can be attributed to three key factors. First, of course, is the wider structural shift in global balance of power. With the center of gravity of global politics and economics now firmly located in the Indo-Pacific, China's challenge to international order can no longer be brushed aside as a mere irritant and that will self-correct eventually. The second factor has been a reassessment by Western Europe of its own identity as a global power. And final and perhaps the most important element in this shifting approach of the West is not about the West at all, but about India's response to its strategic priority. Today's self-confident India has a new voice on the global firmament, clear-rooted and in the domestic realities and civilizational ethos, as well as the firm in the pursuit of its vital interests. Here I will say pursuit of its vital interests, because it's our ethos. If this guy is making these statements, the guy who said "Goli maro salon ko," India, country of honor at Kane's event as Anurag Thakur. Hey, it's just not going to sing right. Right now, the only thing is, as Harsh Pant, the only thing that I think is there's no civilizational ethos, there's no real democracy. It's the pursuit of vital interest is of critical, and there's convergence here between the West and India because of the Indo-Pacific. But this is a perishable commodity, as Saran pointed out. You got to grab it while it's there. EU proposes Russian oil ban and tougher sanctions. Yet this could be now a big game changer, even though the bigger import is gas. EU also targets Moscow oil trade with shipping sanctions. Modi's focus in France, support for self-reliance in defense and space, joint effort to counter challenge in Indo-Pacific region, Ukraine situation discussed, okay? Then we have this. Quad is a tool to contain China's rise, says foreign minister, and that's nothing could be further from the truth. Look back to look ahead, a foreign policy rethink. Says Jen Majia Sinha. He says the US now sees India as a counterbalance to China. Likewise, India cannot ally with China and Pakistan, its key rivals, and its technological needs are much closer aligned to the US. This is what we should remember. India must shift its arms purchases away from Russia to the West. Simultaneously, the government must provide predictability and reliability in defense demand so that the private sector enters the defense production in a big way. That's really the problem. And see, China just keeps trying to mess everybody up. China lobbying against CHIPS Act, says United States President. Biden says that CCP is opposing the act, which is meant to create incentives to boost domestic semiconductor manufacturing. Expect that to do that in India too. In Delhi and DC, how realism won. In terms of the conflict and endgame itself, the US wants a much weaker Russia, preferably without Vladimir Putin. Does it suit India? I don't know. But this week showed resilience. And this was possible because neither side wants to actively hurt the other's interest on an issue on which they may not have identical views. They are willing to build convergences when possible, and they are focused on the real challenge of the future. Security and power calculations prevent realist one. The next step in India-US partnership. This is the important part, right, Chanakya? Within India, the system is divided. All actors know that US is important, but some appear to think the US power is on the decline, or that Joe Biden isn't entirely coherent in his decision-making, or that India is so indispensable that the West will continue to quote it in the manner Delhi wants, irrespective of its position and actions. All of these are questionable premises. And if we want to push back the Chinese challenge in the neighborhood, greater coordination with Washington strengthens our hand and sends a message to interlocutors in Kathmandu and Colombo and Male. This is not to say that the US hasn't declined. It has. Nor is it to say the US does not have own narrow self-interest in all these domains to work with India. It does. But it is to suggest that the US will is still enormously powerful and is still useful for all of India's security and development goals, and it will only be honest to admit that. Two, the premise that Biden has somehow out of depth is questionable. While Afghanistan represented a shameful abdication of responsibility that the US would rather not talk about, the Ukraine crisis has shown Biden's strength. American intelligence anticipated the Russian invasion much before anyone else, and Biden decided to make it public to shape public opinion, global opinion against Moscow. American support to Ukraine has enabled it a far more fierce resistance than Russia had anticipated. American investment in allies has led to a reset in Europe's geopolitical calculations in a way which would have been hard to imagine just 2 months ago. American control over the international financial system has sent a message not just to Moscow but also to Beijing and about what its expansionism can lead to. And finally, to assume that India is indispensable, and this means that there will be no cost to its position, may lead to a degree of overconfidence. The facts don't warrant. India is important but is one amongst the many poles in the international system. But a democratic power, as a status quo power which doesn't want the kind of rupture in global stability that Russian actions have caused, and as a country with soft power which relies on positive public sentiment in the West, India's policy posture must continue to evolve in the same direction. The US must continue to show the maturity it displayed last week. It must rein in voices that believe threatening India with consequences can change India's behavior, because it can. Cheers. In this flux, while self-reliance is getting critical. Self-reliance really has to be redefined, right? Self-reliance not necessarily means that you got to do everything like on your own, but it means you got to do it collectively with a group of trusted partnerships, right? So as Samir Saran writes, the world is in a flux, self-reliance is vital, trusted connectivity, diversified sources of materials and resilient financial and trading arrangements have become strategic imperatives for India. Most important learning through the pandemic years and three geopolitical developments that have created turbulence for India is the burial of the post-war assumptions of the century past that undergirded our modern societies and indeed global project that was born around the same time as India's independence. Then, a chaotic world needs a stable India-US partnership. It sure does, written by Arjun Subramanian. You've got to hear this. The current chaos presents several opportunities for India to scale up its engagement in its near and extended neighborhood, both on its western and eastern flanks, a strategy that would support India's rising power status and signal to the world, to the US, that such moves would only enhance the India-US strategic partnership and not subject it to myopic Russia syndrome that looks at either of proposition over issues such as S-400 or the trickle of Russian oil. The flurry of visits into New Delhi over the last few weeks, the emerging possibilities of trilateral such as the India, France, Japan proposition and brainstorming over whether there is space for India in AUKUS Plus. This is the important one. Clearly indicate that India matters to the world as a net security provider in the region. Can Indian statecraft rise to the occasion is the moot point. Hello. The Biden's Indo-Pacific. Joe Biden doesn't want to change China. He wants to change the strategic environment around China and tilt the balance in favor of US allies and partners. Remember that. If it has to be a collective effort, and the next decade will determine success or failure. The strategy is centered in what the US and the China doesn't. US has and China doesn't. A network of friends through security alliances and strong partnerships. China's friends are few. Pakistan and North Korea lead the pack, with Russia bringing up the rear. What China does have is an unlimited capacity to buy and sell around the world, especially in the US, and play a long game. The fact that the Indo-Pacific strategy was unveiled in the middle of an ongoing Ukrainian crisis and Russia's threatening posture was meant to signal that Biden hasn't taken his eyes off China. Remember that, folks. How Delhi and DC defied skeptics. China drives the strategic convergence, but astute Indian diplomacy in cultivating new constituencies and finding new areas of collaboration has helped. Both the US and India also know that they have to leverage their strengths in defeating China in R&D labs, semiconductor manufacturing plants, supply chains, and shaping global norms on future technologies, the real battlefield of the current moment. But beyond the noise, the story of India-US ties under governments that belong to ideological different schools of thought is of resilience in terms of being able to overcome differences, depth in terms of extent of strategic cooperation, and breadth in terms of the range of areas collaboration. The bilateral story is what enabled the Indo-Pacific strategy and Quad meet on February the 11th. Quad condemns Mumbai Pathankot attacks, wants perpetrators punished. US Indo-Pacific paper says India strong partner. China failed to honor pact. India and Quad meet. Quad leaders take up Indo-Pacific Ukraine. Quad says will speed up wax supplies from India. India takes different line on Myanmar, Ukraine. Myanmar, very appreciated. Calls China out. Therefore, there should be no doubt that China presents the biggest systemic threat to the global order, and that only way China will change course is if there is concerted international pushback as well as costs for Beijing. Business as usual for the Quad, says Harsh Pant. A business as usual diplomatic summit shows that Quad has moved from the heady days of hype to an entrenched and energetic grouping that has carved a place for itself in the politics of the Indo-Pacific and regional security architecture and China's work. Taking cue from India, Philippines differs not for our CEP. So Philippines is jumping away from China. It's bought BrahMos from India too. Jaishankar, Philippines. Counterpart talk security, discuss regional and global matters of mutual interest amid China's territorial ambitions. It's time India focus on Indonesia. India, Australia set up to a key deal this week. This is the other big one. China can weaponize trade, want deeper India ties. Oz XPM. Oz thwarts Chinese plot to fund candidates. That's what they keep doing. We got to be worried too, right? India, Australia to ink early harvest trade deal this week, which they did. India and Australia to work jointly on trusted supply chains. EAM, a great partner. India, Oz, all set to open window to counter Chinese attempt to misuse cyberspace. Natural partners of the future, writes Amitabh Matu. India, Australia, ECPA represents a watershed moment in bilateral relations and significant turning point for India's foreign policy in terms of geostrategy as well as geoeconomics. Okay. Then we have this, folks, the new look East policy. Strengthening engagement with Indo-Pacific, stronger partnership can enhance India's reach and impact, writes C. Raja Mohan. In the past, the US security policy was tied to a series of bilateral alliances. Now it's ready for a more networked regional architecture. Contrary to the Indian image of the Quad as a rigid alliance, the US strategy is to work in flexible groupings that pool our collective strength to face up to defining issues of our time. Put simply, as India that seeks to be a leading power in the region will be a better partner for the US than an India that is weak and defensive. Cheers, folks. A lot of reading on this episode, but do listen. These are very, very interesting guys and have made some really, really valid points, folks, and a lot that I agree with. Jai Hind.